Welcome, dear listener, to HK Citizen Podcast. You're diving into a brand new deep dive from This Week Unpacked.
And it's been quite a week, hasn't it? Our mission, as always, is to unpack a whole stack of sources this time. There are articles written by us, your journalists here at hkcitizen.net.
Exactly. We want to pull out those crucial bits of insight, help you cut through all the noise.
Get to what really matters.
Absolutely. And today, we are navigating 7, pretty compelling stories. We'll kick off right here in the UK, looking at a big high court ruling and a significant diplomatic visit. Then we're heading east over to Hong Kong. We'll unpack the new legislative codes there, a really sensitive debate on partnership rights and those, enduring questions about one country, two systems.
Right.
And then just to round things off, we've got a rather peculiar tax kerfuffle and a very scorching start to Wimbledon.
It's a real mix. Highlights the way global events are so interconnected, doesn't it? And those little details that often get missed.
Okay, so first up, London. A significant legal ruling. The High Court has just dismissed a challenge about the UK's export of F-35 fighter jet components to Israel.
Right, and this challenge came from quite a coalition of human rights groups. You had the Palestinian NGO Al-Haq, Global Legal Action Network, Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, Oxfam, quite a list. Their main argument, their core point, was that these components, they could potentially be used in ways that breach international humanitarian law, in Gaza specifically.
Yet, the court judge Stephen Mayles and Justice Karen Stein, they ruled that deciding whether to pull out of the whole multinational F-35 program, that's a political question, firmly in the government's court, the executive's domain, not for the judges to decide.
Yeah, and this ruling really lays bare that fundamental tension, doesn't it? The court's being reluctant to step into foreign policy, even when, these humanitarian concerns are right there on the table, acknowledged.
It highlights that judicial deference.
Exactly. Judicial deference to the government on these really sensitive issues. Right. Essentially, the court's saying, look, we respect the executive's judgment here. We're not stepping in directly.
So what parts are we actually talking about here? Crucial F-35 spares? Things like laser targeting systems.
Yeah, those. Aerial refueling probes, tires, even the ejector seats. Important stuff. But the mechanics of how they reach Israel are, slightly indirect.
How so?
Well, these components aren't shipped directly UK to Israel. Instead, they go into this big global pool of spare parts.
Right.
Shared by all the partner countries. And Israel, being a partner, can then requisition parts from that pool for its own F-35 fleet.
Okay, but the government's justification for continuing the exports.
Yeah.
That seems complex, especially as they acknowledged, didn't they, even in court, a serious risk these parts could facilitate humanitarian law violations.
That's the paradox, isn't it? A real paradox. Their argument basically centered on the bigger picture, the broader geopolitical implications. Well, they contended that stopping the exports would severely disrupt the entire global F-35 program. It would undermine NATO security, impede UK-US trust, a big one that harm Ukraine's defense capability, potentially threaten wider international peace.
Right.
Defense Secretary John Healey was quite explicit. He said withdrawal would, quote, undermine U.S. confidence in the UK and lead to a profound impact on international security. Strong words.
So unsurprising, then, that human rights groups were, dismayed.
Very dismayed. Shawan Jabarin from Al-Haq called it a setback, though he did note, perhaps a small silver lining, the progress in raising public awareness. Yasmin Ahmed from Human Rights Watch was much sharper. She said it provides, quote, a green light for the UK to continue supplying lethal F-35 components, even in the face of acts of genocide and other atrocities. So very strong reaction there.
And the bigger picture implication.
Well, it affirms that judicial deference we mentioned, particularly in these politically charged national security areas. Campaigners are warning it significantly weakens the UK's arms export regime. And whilst the UK's overall share of the F-35 components is smaller than, say, the US or Germany, it is second only to the US. We supply about 15% of the components for each jet.
15%.
Wow. Yeah. And Al-Haq is looking at grounds for appeal, so, this might not be the absolute final word on it.
Right. Okay, staying with the UK's global footprint, but shifting gear a bit, let's pivot to a different kind of international engagement, this time in Asia. UK Business and Trade Secretary Jonathan Reynolds, he recently finished a 3-day official visit to Taipei.
Yes, and this visit, it really marks a significant cornerstone, doesn't it, of the UK's post-Brexit economic and diplomatic strategy. It's about deepening trade, investment, and that sort of enduring friendship between the UK and Taiwan, a very deliberate signal.
And key highlights included a meeting with the Taiwanese president, Lai Ching-te, and the signing of a pretty landmark bilateral cooperation agreement. What's the main focus of that agreement?
It's quite broad, actually. It specifically zeroes in on trade, technology, innovation, and also fostering stronger cultural ties. So it facilitates better market access for UK businesses, particularly in Taiwan's tech and renewable energy sectors. And importantly, it encourages Taiwanese investment back into the UK, especially in our green tech and AI industries.
Right.
It even includes bits about joint research and development, things like clean energy solutions, next generation chip design.
Reynolds really emphasized the friendship aspect, didn't he, saying Taiwan is not just a vital economic partner, but a close friend, sharing values like freedom and innovation. It's quite striking how carefully the UK is navigating the diplomatic sensitivities here, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's a very delicate balancing act. The UK government officially maintains its adherence to the One China policy. They frame the visit as purely about economic and cultural cooperation.
But analysts see more to it.
Well, yes. Analysts certainly suggest it's a strategic move post-Brexit to diversify trade, build stronger alliances with like-minded democracies. President Lai, for his part, gave Reynolds a warm welcome, highlighted the long-standing friendship and shared values, and Taiwan's Ministry of Economic Affairs pointed to specific areas for cooperation: 5G, offshore wind, EV supply chains.
And Reynolds' itinerary seemed to back that up, visiting TSMC, for instance.
Exactly. He visited TSMC, Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing company, which, as you probably know, produces, over 60% of the world's chips and over 90% of the really advanced ones. Huge player.
Massive.
He also toured Hsinchu Science Park, attended a cultural exchange event. It really reflected that collaboration emphasis.
So a lot of enthusiasm generated by this visit.
Considerable enthusiasm, yes, especially given Taiwan's absolutely critical role in the global chip industry. And the UK's expertise in green tech and AI, it really complements Taiwan's strengths. So you can see clear opportunities for, collaborative innovation.
Despite potential concerns about Beijing's reaction.
Yes, whilst some UK lawmakers did voice concerns about how Beijing might react, the Foreign Office just reiterated that the visit aligns with long-standing policy, focus on friendship. It really does underscore how global alliances and trade strategies are evolving in this, very complex geopolitical landscape.
Okay, let's move across now to Hong Kong. The Legislative Council there has unveiled a shiny new code of conduct. And it feels, a bit like a new school rulebook has just landed, doesn't it?
It does have that feel, yes, but with far deeper implications than just, quote, upholding governance prestige, which is how the chairman Andrew Leung put it when he unveiled it on July 3rd. Those vague warnings against undermining the prestige of governance, they're particularly telling.
Yes, that's where the implications really bite, isn't it? This isn't just about keeping MPs in line day to day. It's another chapter, really, in a much longer story of tightening control. We've already had the national security law imposed back in 2020 after the 2019 protests. That led to mass arrests, disqualified lawmakers, effectively purged the legislature of anyone who wasn't deemed a patriot. So why bring in this new code now?
It does beg the question, doesn't it? The official line is, yes, upholding governance, but since 2019, the government's been systematically ensuring no legislator dares even whisper anything seen as disloyal.
Right.
Remember the expulsion of those 4 pro-democracy lawmakers back in 2020? That really set the tone. This new code feels like a direct sequel, just designed to cement that control even further.
There was more, wasn't there? Something about electoral guidelines.
Yes, just for extra measure, really. The Electoral Affairs Commission dropped its proposed guidelines for the 2025 legislative election on July 4th. And they doubled down on this control, breached the national security law, you're simply out of the race. End of story.
So it's less about a school rule book, more about making absolutely sure nobody doodles outside the political lines.
Precisely. It cements a system where only, correct candidates get a seat. It's a direct response, you could argue, to the 2019 district elections where pro-democracy candidates did so well.
Swept the board, yeah.
It paints a pretty stark picture, doesn't it? A legislature where dissent just isn't welcome anymore. The culmination of years of clamping down, really going back to the 2014 umbrella movement and beyond.
Okay, sticking with Hong Kong, the government has tabled a bill proposing a same-sex partnership registration scheme. Now, this comes directly from a landmark ruling by the Court of Final Appeal, the CFA, back in 2023.
That's right. The CFA basically mandated that by October 2025, the government must set up some kind of legal framework. It needs to recognize same-sex partnerships and safeguard their fundamental rights. This ruling came after years and years of legal battles over the lack of protection in basic areas like housing, inheritance, medical decisions.
So for actual couples on the ground, what would this proposed scheme mean in practice?
Well, it would allow same-sex couples who are legally married overseas to register that marriage here in Hong Kong. But, and it's a big, but it only grants quite limited rights.
Okay, like what?
Things like medical decision-making, hospital visitation rights, handling affairs after a partner's death. Crucially, though, it explicitly excludes things like inheritance rights, housing benefits, or tax advantages that married opposite-sex couples get.
Right.
The Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs, Chris Tang, he stressed the government's constitutional obligation to do something, but clarified the scheme is, quote, entirely distinct from same-sex marriage. It doesn't undermine the traditional one-husband, one-wife marriage framework in their view.
And there are conditions attached.
Yes, 6 conditions, including things like at least one partner needing to be a Hong Kong resident, and importantly, they must already have a valid overseas marriage certificate.
Now, it's quite striking. The reaction from some lawmakers was, well, pretty fiery.
Extremely fiery in some cases. Election committee lawmaker Junius Ho vehemently opposed it, warned it would harm generations to come. He even questioned the CFA's legitimacy, suggesting maybe Beijing's National People's Congress should step in and reinterpret things.
Wow. And he wasn't alone.
No, other pro-establishment figures like Starry Lee and Priscilla Leung from the DAB party echoed similar sentiments. Starry Lee cautioned against a future where, quote, a mum might not be a woman if traditional marriage isn't upheld. Priscilla Leung called it a dark day for traditional values.
But there were moderate voices, too.
Yes, thankfully. People like Ronnie Tong urged colleagues to respect the CFA ruling, show more respect for humanity and civilization. A clear division there.
So how have LGBTQ plus advocacy groups reacted? Mixed feelings, I imagine.
Exactly. Mixed feelings is the right way to put it. On the one hand, it's seen as a small step forward, a recognition forced by the court. But critics immediately point to its very restrictive scope.
Excluding key rights.
Yes. Excluding key rights like inheritance and that requirement for an overseas marriage that disadvantages many couples who perhaps can't travel or afford to marry abroad. Activist Chom's Kit, whose own case actually led to that CFA ruling, he stressed the community isn't asking for the moon, just basic protections enjoyed by others.
It really makes you think, how does Hong Kong's approach stack up against its neighbors in Asia?
It's a very uneven picture across Asia, isn't it? Really patchy. Only Taiwan, back in 2019, and Thailand just this year, January 2025, have actually legalized same-sex marriage nationwide, granting most or all rights.
Right.
Nepal recognizes overseas marriages. Japan has these sort of non-binding partnership certificates in some areas, despite public support for more. Singapore decriminalized same-sex acts recently, but they also put in a constitutional block against marriage equality at the same time.
A real mixed bag.
And then places like Malaysia and Indonesia remain actively hostile. So Hong Kong's approach, while it's a step forward because the court forced it, it remains very cautious, very limited, definitely lagging behind the regional pioneers on equality.
And that brings us, perhaps, to the biggest question mark hanging over Hong Kong. It's now 28 years since the handover on July 1st, 1997. Is that promise of one country, two systems now, well, truly in tatters?
It's the unavoidable question, isn't it? The policy promised Hong Kong people governing Hong Kong, a high degree of autonomy, guaranteed for 50 years. And before the handover, Hong Kong was this economic powerhouse, wasn't it? Solid GDP growth, robust rule of law. The last British governor, Chris Patten, even introduced democratic reforms, brought in directly elected seats.
But the handover itself, it sort of shattered those hopes almost immediately.
Almost immediately. Beijing set up the Provisional Legislative Council, which straightaway reversed democratic progress, brought back old repressive laws. Patten's reforms were just declared invalid. Poof.
And the promise of universal suffrage, electing the leader.
That's remained an illusion, really. The 2014 8.31 decision from Beijing led to the umbrella movement protests. Then the 2021 electoral reforms basically disqualified most pro-democracy candidates. We saw record low voter turnout. And John Lee becoming chief executive as the sole candidate, it showcased a rather hollow reality.
But the real critical turning point, many would say, was the national security law imposed in June 2020. imposed without any local consultation.
Absolutely. That was the watershed moment for freedoms. Its definitions of things like secession, subversion, collusion. They're incredibly vague but carry incredibly harsh penalties, up to life imprisonment.
Hmm.
Over 120 people were arrested under it in just the first year. High-profile figures like Jimmy Lai, the media owner. Independent outlets like Apple Daily, Stand News, forced to close.
And then came Article 23 legislation last year, tightening the noose even further.
Exactly. Article 23, the local security law, criminalized new offenses like external interference, stealing state secrets. Again, very broadly defined. We've actually seen cases where things like academic research or just routine international exchanges have led to charges under these laws.
It creates a climate of fear, presumably.
A profound climate of fear, where even normal discussions, things you wouldn't think twice about, suddenly feel like they might cross invisible legal red lines. And civil society, which was so vibrant under British rule, it's been decimated. Trade unions, student unions, NGOs, systematically dismantled or forced to disband. Amnesty International's 2024 report basically declared Hong Kong's civil society near extinction.
And the impact internationally, reputation, business.
Plummeted. The U.S. revoked Hong Kong's special trade status back in 2020. Western firms are increasingly relocating, citing political risks. One survey suggested 42% were planning to move some operations within 5 years. And the brain drain, that's significant.
The B&O visa scheme in the UK.
Yes, the UK's British National Overseas Visa Scheme. Around 530,000 Hong Kong residents emigrated via that route alone between 2020 and 2023. That's a huge number. And Freedom House, the democracy watchdog, their 2024 report slashed Hong Kong's freedom score down to 42. That's far below places like Singapore or indeed Taiwan.
It's quite striking, isn't it, the parallels sometimes drawn with Tibet's experience. Their version of one country, two systems started way back in 1951.
It is an eerie parallel. Similar promises were made back then, cultural autonomy, religious freedom, and similarly, those promises were systematically broken over time.
Right.
In Tibet today, economic growth has largely benefited non-Tibetan settlers brought in. Tibetan language education is marginalized. Religious activities are incredibly tightly controlled. Things like the Panchen Lama controversy in 1995, the Lhasa protests in 2008, they just demonstrate that systematic suppression. In both Hong Kong and Tibet, it seems the dominance of one country has ultimately prevailed, crushing that local distinctiveness and autonomy that two systems was supposed to protect.
Right. Let's try and lighten the mood, just slightly, though still involving rules and regulations. Let's dive into a very British peculiarity. A tax debate, believe it or not, over a Marks and Spencer sandwich. Ah, yes, the sandwich. This new limited edition one, the Red Diamond Strawberry and Creme Sandwich, inspired by the Japanese Furutsu Sando, the fruit sandwich.
Causing quite a stir, apparently.
It is. So it's made with soft bread, fresh strawberries, cream cheese. Sounds nice enough. But the crucial point is tax experts are looking closely at whether it should actually be subject to VAT, value-added tax.
Because under UK VAT rules, most cold takeaway sandwiches are zero rated, right? No 20% VAT added.
Exactly. Most sandwiches are considered basic food, so zero rated. But
yeah.
What's the fuss about this particular creation?
That one.
Well, tax specialists are suggesting this sweet sandwich might fall under an old amendment from the 1980s, I think, that classifies sweetened prepared foods eaten with the fingers as confectionery.
Ah, and confectionery is taxable. Confectionery is standard rated, yes. Taxable at 20%. Simon Nivet from the accountancy firm H.W. Fisher noted that the sweetbread, the dessert-like qualities, it might align it more with taxable things like cakes or maybe chocolate-covered biscuits rather than your standard cheese and pickle sandwich.
Okay. Has HMRC, the tax authority, said anything?
HMRC haven't confirmed any formal investigation, but the product's classification is definitely contentious. M&S, for their part, insists it is a sandwich and therefore qualifies for zero rating.
But if HMRC disagrees?
If HMRC rules otherwise, that £2.80 price tag, which is often part of their popular meal deal, could suddenly face an extra 20% tax.
It reminds me of that famous Jaffa Cakes case from years ago.
Precisely. The 1991 Jaffa Cakes case. McVitie's successfully argued their product was legally a cake, which is zero rated, rather than a biscuit, which would have been taxable because it was chocolate covered.
It went down to whether it goes hard or soft when stale, didn't it?
It did indeed. Cakes go hard, biscuits go soft. It truly highlights the, well, sometimes absurd dividing lines that tax legislation can create. In the sand, or maybe in the sandwich filling in this case.
And social media. Having a field day, I assume?
Predictably, yes. Lots of amusement, some frustration maybe at HMRC potentially chasing tax on, well, a sandwich.
It's fascinating, though, how it illustrates that line between necessity foods, kept cheaper by being zero-rated,
Yeah.
and non-essential or luxury items like sweets and confectionery, which get the full VAT whack.
Absolutely. Where exactly do you draw that line? This strawberry sandwich case, it just beautifully illustrates how blurred and frankly quite amusing that line can become.
Okay, finally, let's wrap up with a topic that is genuinely hot, quite literally. Wimbledon 2025 kicked off under an absolutely unprecedented heat wave.
Scorching. Yes, Sunday's opening day saw temperatures down in southwest London soar to 33.1 degrees Celsius, apparently the hottest start in the tournament's entire 147-year history.
Wow. And the Met Office issued heat health alerts.
Yes, for much of southern England. Network Rail even had to put temporary speed restrictions on some lines because of the risk of the rails buckling in the heat, affecting services to and from Wimbledon Station, naturally.
So officials were urging caution. Stay hydrated, find shade.
Very much so. And the medical tents were apparently reporting a higher number of minor heat-related incidents than usual, even on day one. But despite the sweltering conditions, play went on, and we saw some electrifying matches.
Any highlights?
Well, the rising British star Ella Cartwright pulled off a huge upset, stunning the 10th seed Jelena Rybakina. Great result for her. Meanwhile, the defending men's champion, Carlos Alcaraz, he comfortably cruised through his opening match. Business as usual for him.
What's really fascinating here, though, is how the tournament organizers are having to adapt, isn't it?
It really is. They actually confirm that the court routes usually close just for rain, as we know they might actually be closed during extreme heat peaks now. Not just for rain, but for player safety in excessive heat.
That's quite a shift for Wimbledon.
It's a very rare adjustment for a championship so famous for its all-weather play, its grass courts. It really indicates a significant shift, perhaps, in response to changing climate realities.
It certainly begs the question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
As climate change continues to reshape what we expect from a British summer, is this sort of thing going to become the new normal for the world's oldest tennis tournament?
Only time will tell, I suppose, but for now, the play continues, the passion's still there. Tradition meeting temperature, you could say.
Well, we've certainly covered a fair bit of ground today, haven't we? From that high court ruling and UK-Taiwan diplomacy, right through to the intricacies of Hong Kong's legislative changes, societal debates, not forgetting that very British tax kerfuffle over a sandwich and the scorching start to Wimbledon.
Indeed. We really hope this deep dive is giving you, our listener, plenty to think about. Maybe prompted you to consider how all these global events connect up and those nuanced details that often get lost in the main headlines.
Perhaps even sparked a thought, as you said, on how traditional institutions, whether it's law courts or tennis tournaments, find themselves having to adapt to these ever-changing realities around them.
Food for thought.
And that is all for this deep dive from This Week Unpacked here on HK Citizen Podcast.
Thank you so much for tuning in. For more news, those in-depth articles and analysis, please do visit our official website, hkcitizen.net, or you can follow us on our social media channels.
From all of us here, it's goodbye for now.
This program was produced in London